Welcome to the Genre Hustle, your virtual sci-fi fantasy writers group. I'm Anton.
I'm Jane.
I'm Chris.
I'm Lucy.
I'm Kate.
And I'm Chelsea.
And you just heard we have Kate with us today. Thank you for coming, Kate.
Pleasure to be here, Anton.
Can you give us a quick bio? What do you do? What do you write? What do you like?
Well, I am a marketing consultant for the film industry in my day job, but I have been writing fiction for almost as long as I can remember. Right now, I write primarily science fiction, mostly space opera.
It's another one in the room.
Do a lot of found family sort of space opera, crew brings together stuff, but with heavy political leanings and lots of spy-fi thrown in. So I think it's fun.
I'm impressed that you have a day job. I think.
What's that?
Yeah, I know. Chris doesn't know anything about day jobs.
Shut up. Kate we should also say, is one of the founding members of our writers
Oh,
group.
yes.
So she's kind of a big deal around here.
It's pivotal.
We don't want
in the whole organization.
The goddess, queen, empress of the writing group.
And Chris, you have good news this time, right?
I do have good news. I have an agent.
Yay!
So another tiny step on an incredibly long journey towards death. But yeah, so I'm with Tradaine Northern from Prentice Literary. So
that's very exciting.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited. So
it couldn't have happened to a better writer.
Thanks, Chelsea. Hopefully the book will get sold at some point.
Yeah, and then you'll make dozens of dollars.
I'll make probably
on Amazon.
I might even make more than I make on the podcast. We'll see.
Really?
We'll see.
Oh my God.
And all the money's going right back into Zerby Studios,
It's all going back into like pop screens.
Wait, am I supposed to be getting paid?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We're paid.
Oh, we'll
You're
talk
getting paid
about
in
that.
donut holes. So today we're talking about action. How to write action. What is action? What do we mean when we say action in sci-fi and fantasy?
So I think we can take action as broadly as anything that's not dialogue or setting description. And then you can narrow it as much as, a very specific type of physical fighting. In fantasy, you see a lot of sword fighting. In sci-fi, you might see laser battles. But really, I think what we're talking about is that action can be kind of a gamut of different experiences that the characters go through, and each type of scene is going to reveal something different about the story. So
Right.
I just want to push back on saying that action isn't dialogue, because I treat dialogue as action.
Well, who said it's conflict in motion?
I was about to say, yeah, somebody said that before we got on mic.
I don't remember who said it, but that is a really...
Is it Chelsea?
Chelsea, did
All
you
right.
say?
yeah, so I said that.
That's very brilliant.
Action is conflict in motion, and I don't think it excludes dialogue, but I think where the gas is in the scene is more on the physical side and more on unspoken communication as opposed to actually just speaking to each other.
But I guess I think of dialogue as action because dialogue also is about what the characters choose to say and do, and I think when characters are shown making choices, that contributes to action, right?
Well, I guess we'll get into it.
Yeah, I guess we will.
We're already getting some sparks flying here.
Let's get into the first example. Let's start with you, Chris. You had a good example.
I do. So my example, I get to bring up Jeff VanderMeer once a season. I think we've decided that.
I think once an hour.
I've decided that. So my example is actually from The Strange Bird, which is a story that is based in the Bourne universe, which I love. And I'll just read a quick little part of the scene here. And this features the strange bird being attacked by other flying creatures. They treated the strange bird as foe, with a great raspy chirping, the beat of wings mighty as one, and raked at her with their beaks. She dropped and rolled, bewildered, to get below them, but they followed, pecking and making of their dislike a vast orchestral sound, and she wore a coat of them, felt their oily mottled feathers scraping against hers. It was an unbearable sensation, and with a shriek the strange bird halted her dive and instead rose fast, tunneling up through a well of cold air against the weight of her kin, until the little birds peeled off, could not follow that high, and became a cloud below, furious and gnat-like. While the cold wind brought her a metallic smell and the world opened up, so the strange bird could see on the curving edges that the desert did end, and on one corner at least turned green and wooded. A faint but sharp scent of sea salt tantalized, faded into nothing, but spoke to the compass within her, which came alive once again.
Wow.
So what I love
pretty
about
good.
Yeah, he's pretty good. What I love about that is that he's using so many different senses to describe the scene, and especially like he's using the feel of their as an oily coat against his skin, and
He hears the shrieks.
and the scent of the sea, and it's a reminder that when we experience the world, especially when things are happening like a tumultuous melee like this, it's not just a visual thing. You feel it, you taste it, you smell it. All of the senses can work together, and I think it makes it much more evocative.
Can I add one thing to that too, which I thought was really interesting, was he mentions close and then far away. The bit where he talks about the desert being, and then there's something out in the distance, and I realized the action is always very close. I feel like, especially when you're talking about like fighting or even dialogue, they have to be near each other. But to talk about the distance, like I never thought about that, right? You have something, like suddenly there's something, and it immediately puts everything else in perspective because you're right. In the action, you're right there. But then to contrast that with something far away, that's a very interesting trick.
He managed to maintain the immediacy of the experience by still bringing in the sensory things. So it's like...
That's huge, yeah.
Yeah, that was really good. Another thing that I really liked about that scene is the proximity of the physical bodies to each other. So there's this cloud of the little birds and the one big bird moving in and out of it.
Right.
And so it's like he doesn't have to give detail like she moved north or whatever. Like it's just a very simple, like, this is the motion that's happening.
Yeah.
And so it lets the reader just, see it for themselves.
Yeah, and the whole thing takes place in a couple of paragraphs, and there's a lot that happens in those paragraphs. He's very economical about using his descriptions, even though it's very rich and, like I said, very evocative, I think. Like, I feel it, I see it, the whole thing. It's really good.
I think that's a really good example of action that does a lot of world building at the same time. It gives you a sense of height and allows the characters to describe the surroundings as well. I would like to talk about action as a way to get into a bit of character development. And an example that I chose was from Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. And she starts off the book with action. So page 1, we are having a staff fight. And you're seeing it through first-person POV from the main character's
Staff,
point of view.
you mean sticks, not
Staff,
not like employees.
Carved.
Not like it works.
It's not an administrative problem. It's people hitting each other.
Yeah, with pens. No, long carved wooden sticks. And she builds up to the fight quite slowly. And there's a series of choices and a series of opinions that are going on within the main character's head that tell you a lot about the main character. So she wants to fight. She wants to be picked for the fight, which tells us that she's brave. She believes in her head that she's going to win, even though her opponent is formidable. So it tells us that she's super self-confident and plucky. And when she does get picked and when she gets into the fight, she becomes offended because her opponent reminds her of an oppressor from the city, and she loses her temper and lets her emotions get away from her, and therefore loses the fight. So it tells you that this main character is really skilled, but she often lets her emotions get in the way of actually being able to reason and use logic. So straight away, I'm going to go on a journey with this character, and by the end of the book, she's going to have learned not only how to fight and be a great fighter, but she's going to have learned how to use her mind as well, and her logic and reasoning. So I think it's just it's like, this is the world, it's tribal, it's really desperate, there's a lot of conflict going on, and this character is woefully prepared for it. So we're going to go on this big journey with her. So I just think that it's a really good example of, here is everything about this character within the fight.
That's something that I really like that a lot of authors are able to do, that you're able to characterize through the different fighting styles and the different action styles. One of the authors that wasn't on the board, but that I think does a really good job of that, is an author called JS Morin. He's actually a self-published author on Amazon, but he has a lot of different POVs that he plays with. And because of the style and how people think, these different characters think of their fighting styles or their action styles, their knowledge of the different weaponry within the world, you're able to very quickly tell what POV that you're in. He uses these little tiny markers like pulling a trigger versus squeezing a trigger as a way to define how each character is familiar with fighting and action. And it contributes to the sense of action as well, because it's either very fast and deliberate and actionable action, or it is more muddling and struggling kind of action, depending on how custom the character is to it, and that can help with the world building as well.
Lucy, you said that Tomi Adeyemi opens with the fight scene, right?
Yeah.
And I think that goes back to, you're often told to open with action and open with something
In media res.
exciting in media res. But sometimes, and I don't know if you've all come across this too, but sometimes I read some openings that are too chaotic, and it's almost like there's too much going on, and I don't understand what the stakes are, and I don't quite have a sense of the character yet. And I think that's a really sort of tricky thing to manage, to handle all of those pieces.
I agree. Sometimes it feels like the first chapter, the action is just for action's sake, and it's hard to care about it because you don't have a sense of who the character is. So you don't know who you're really rooting for in the scene.
Right. Sometimes authors will overshoot and they'll just sort of start right in the middle, and it's supposed to be chaotic. But yeah,
Start with a bang. And
start with a bang.
just-
Yeah. So I think there's also we're talking about, Lucy, I think timing of action, and we're talking about at the beginning of the story. I think that is a pretty common usage of action, of starting the story right at something happened. I'm not saying this well. Go ahead, Chelsea. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but I think like the choice that you make with action is, when do I want to use it? Because it's what it does is, on the one hand, it slows down the tension because it's like, oh, okay, we're fighting now. On the other hand, it gives a lot of interest and drama and fun to a scene. The way I tried to approach it in my last Nano project, that is not finished yet, but don't look at me like that.
Oh, we're looking.
But you've got the first 50,000 words out.
Now 55,000 words.
There you
There you go. So like in my first chapter, my main character is waiting for a hanging to start so that she can rescue the person who's going to be hung. And so what I tried to do was give her room and some stillness, because she's physically still for the first few pages while she's watching the action unravel around her and waiting for her plan to go off. Her plan doesn't go off. She is in a lot of doubt. And by the time I'm able to move her down onto the ground, now it's time for her to start fighting. So here's my example. Hawk skidded to a stop and spun. 5 guardsmen, all in blue and green uniforms of the Legium Arcana, stood swords out, ready to do violence, and her blood sang. She gave the leather pack a firm shake, and a roll of sharpened steel and small combustibles unraveled across the sand. She kicked her rapier up into her waiting grip and parried the first attack away. She took up a stance, Balotelli, best for the sandy terrain and multiple targets, and got to work. Her blade whistled through the air as she slapped away haphazard attacks. It hadn't been that long since she fought 5, and one neat parry, a dodge, and a riposte later, it was down to 4. So what I tried to do was, like, I wanted to establish her expertise. Like, she finally knows what she's doing. Like, she can feel the doubt about her really bad plan dropping away. Things are finally like actually more in her control now that she's fighting 5 people, as opposed to when she was like...
How about the fact that she kicked a rapier up into her hand?
Well, she's really badass, all right?
Well, I really like that she thinks about the style that she's using and stuff, but you do it in a way that it doesn't slow down the action.
Yes.
It's just like, it kind of feels like it would if you're an expert at something. You're like Botticelli, or I don't remember what the style is. It's not Botticelli.
Balotelli. I actually use last names from Italian football players for, for every different stance that I make up.
So awesome. But I like that, and I like the way you did it. Like, it felt like how an expert sword fighter would be thinking in the moment.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, that's kind of what I was going for. I wanted to, when I approach a fight scene myself, what I want to do is give, I think about the flow and kind of the geography of what I'm looking at, rather than like specific body parts. Because I think on our first episode, our season opener, I brought up that among thieves, and we noted that the example was a bit clunky, that he was calling out specific body parts and how he was moving, and we all noticed that it slows down the scene because it takes, I think, actual physical effort to read through something and be like, wait, what?
So this is I want to bring up a quote that is actually about martial arts films, but I think it's really relevant to fight scenes in general. And it's by a scholar named Nancy Wang Yen from Biola University. And she wrote, martial arts is a conversation. Not just people beating one another up. In martial arts films, you get to know the characters through their fighting styles and better understand relationships through how they fight one another. It's not violence for violence sake. Rather, it is akin to a form of interpretive dance. And I always thought that was a really wonderful way to think about how do these characters engage on the page.
Yeah, that's exactly,
I
I think, what like Lucy was saying, and also Chelsea, like it's doing more than just, oh, it's a fun, like, you know, popcorn.
I have to fight 5 guards because I have to get to the thing behind them.
Mm-hmm. No, if there's character development and sort of something deeper going on beneath, moving the story forward, that's a successful action scene.
I think that's the interesting part. For me, anyway, I would often have a tendency to skip through action if it's just action for action's sake. But if there are psychological choices going on with real stakes, okay, if I run over here and save this person, then this person, something may happen to them. Or if I do this, then that will happen. That becomes really interesting, I think, and tells you a lot.
Yeah, I like what you're saying, Lucy, that, you know, psychology, I think, really matters to a fight scene just as much, because if somebody is more competent and more comfortable fighting a bunch of people than, like, eating with them, it really says something about who that person is. I'm reading Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse right now, and there was this one little scene. It's this quick little exchange, and to me, like, it was like, oh, okay, that's who this character is. So she has like she has tribal powers, the main character, and one of them is, it's kind of like a bloodlust, and so she is in this confrontation with this sheriff called Long Arm, and he thinks that he's got one up on her. But then she has this thought. It would go like this, a punch to the throat, and as he gasps and instinctively reaches for his neck, I unholster his pistol, turn into his body, using him for cover as I raise the gun to take out his partner, whose reaction time is slow enough that he won't even see the bullet coming for his forehead. Tap, tap. Then the pistol's at Long Arm's temple, and I tap him too. 4 seconds, tops, and they're both dead. The thought makes me smile. Long Arm must have seen something in my face. Some light in my eyes that tells him he's on thinner ice than he bargained for. There's a moment where I can see the sweat break out on his upper lip, where I can watch in slow motion as he licks it away, suddenly hesitant. So what I like is that the entire fight takes place in her head.
Yeah.
We don't know what he thought was going to happen or what she was going to do or anything, but he's nervous. And so really the only action that takes place in that moment is him licking his lip.
Yeah.
Right.
He's the sheriff?
Yeah, he's the sheriff. Of
and his name's Long Arm?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like the
great.
long arm.
No, I got it. Oh, I got it. Yeah. No, I got it.
Do you get it?
Yeah.
And that tells us how dark she is as a character. I think there's definitely an element of darkness about her because she is thinking...
Yeah, the book is really dark.
And it makes
It's
the
like-
thought
Yeah.
of doing this violence makes her smile.
Yeah.
I really
And Jane,
Makes
that
her
goes,
super happy.
Yeah.
Jane,
Well,
that goes to
I-
your point of action doesn't have to be action. Like those were literally just her thoughts.
Right. Yeah. Literally just thoughts.
Personally, I love reading a character that fights dirty. I just, I mean, the only example that I can think of is from a film, The Joker from Batman, but there's something really thrilling about reading a character that is morally corrupt in a fight.
Especially if they know it and they recognize
Yes.
it. That's a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I
so
think.
it's ground to explore morals as well, I think.
And it can set up, we talk about action doing more than just the action. It can also set up themes for the book. And again, the characterization element as well.
I think that Chelsea, that scene that you just read also reminded me again of the quote that you gave, Jane, about the kung fu fighting, that like it tells us a lot about their relationship. Like he's a little scared of her. Like even though she doesn't say anything in the scene, she's just thinking this stuff. He's nervous because she's giving him a look. And that tells us a lot about how the two are interacting.
Yeah, which I think goes to show that a lot can happen between two characters without physicality.
Yeah, all she did was smile at him.
Yeah.
And we don't know what he thought she was thinking. We don't know what he's feeling in his own mind. But it's probably involving, blood and broken bones. So
It's dramatic. There's tension. Yeah.
Yeah, so Chelsea, my example is about
Some
dialogue. It is. So I won't read the whole thing, or I won't read it, but it's from, my example is from Swords Point, which does have a number of excellent sword
you're skipping all those sword fights. I
Forget all of our
can
sword fights
name
out.
like 3 right now.
But those are too obvious, okay? But this is actually a conversation between Sanvier and Alec, who are lovers. And Alec is a young university student with a mysterious past. And Sanvier is a sword fighter who's the best in Riverside. And possibly in this country. And Sanvier has brought Alec a present. And at first Alec is like, oh, that's great. And then the mood shifts and suddenly Alec is like bitter and Sanvier tries to kind of understand what's happened. And at the end, so then at the end, Richard Sanvier, his breath caught, but he had faced such dangerous opponents before. And then he says, come on, he said, let's go down to Rosa. And then he tries to kind of make it all better. But there's this real sense of tension and emotional danger in this because we worry about the fate of these lovers and they have sort of an unstable relationship in some respects. And we worry about the threat to them from both within their relationship and from the outside world because we don't know a lot about where Alec is from. And there's the sense that he brings danger into the relationship.
Yeah, I like that. The fight between them makes us care more because it's like, oh no, stay together or don't, or I don't know. And yeah, I like that a lot. And I like that it's very interesting to see what a character interprets emotional danger as just as threatening as imminent physical death.
Yeah, and Richard is not afraid of his opponents because he knows he's the best sword fighter in the city, and so he'll just go and just randomly kill people, and it's no big deal. But he's afraid of Alec, of this university student.
So in a way,
That's
sort of
good.
if we're saying action is conflict and motion, this is the absence of motions or the threat of motion almost, because if he is the best sword fighter, it's this idea that he could, at some point, he could kill the other guy. Is that kind of it? Or is
No. That doesn't. No, not at all. That doesn't even enter into it. They love each other, but it's the emotional danger of not really knowing who your partner is and not really understanding how you could be hurt emotionally by being so close to someone else, I think.
Yeah, and without having read it, I think a lot of it is the mental motion, and you see that a lot in like spy-fi and investigative stuff as well. It's the kind of the repartee and the back and forth that's a verbal sword fight as opposed to an actual sword fight. And
Totally.
I get okay.
Yeah, exactly so.
Well, language can be really violent.
Yeah.
As violent. In this example that I talked about earlier from Children of Blood and Bone, her opponent taunts her and she uses a word that is used in a derogatory sense in the city to put down the lower classes. And when she says that, she knows that it's going to enrage her opponent and make her fly off the handles. So the language can also be super violent. Part of the fight.
Yeah.
What the author has done, it sounds like she's created, and Ellen Kushner too, is that they've created the emotional geography of the fight. And so they're aware of the pitfalls and the problems in the mountains and the valleys just as much as you would when you're doing a physical fight. I'm thinking about the sandy terrain. I'm thinking about the tree roots. I'm thinking about how hot it is. But you could also think about she really hates it when I talk about her dead mom. He really hates it when I egg him on about, how poor he used to be, things like that.
Yeah.
And so
I'm going to throw her off first verbally and then using action.
I love that phrase, emotional terrain. It's interesting.
one of my examples is it comes out of a space opera spy-fi novel that I'm working on, and it is following our kind of undercover clandestine character who is not what she appears to be, but she's been on a ship that has just been sabotaged and essentially is in the process of blowing up, but she's also running and hiding from these and trying to escape from people who are boarding it and trying to get something that you won't discover what that is until toward the end of the book, the MacGuffin.
There's a lot going on.
And so this is coming out of her finally getting toward the end of it. She's been fighting through and sees light at the end of the tunnel and is exhausted, and kind of piggybacking on something that Chris had said in one of the earlier episodes this season about how he hates when you fight and you fight and you fight and the main character doesn't have any kind of physical toil.
Yeah, totally.
So the heat of another rifle blast grazed past her already burned arms as she squeezed through the slightly ajar hatch. The cold of the captain's in-port cabin bit at her, the change in temperature sharp in the absence of fire. The atmosphere was too thin. Her thoughts evaporated in face of the view. The desk was gone, as was most of the bulkhead wall. A force field flickered in the wide space between her and the void. And just off Alice's port bow, glittering in the flames of the great ship before it, drifted something as dark and black as the space surrounding it. Brighton forced herself to move, numb and dazed, the adrenaline leaving her far too early. Almost there. She just needed a little more from her body. The escape pod was on the other side of the cabin, lit and open and waiting. She threw herself inside, falling on her back on the floor, her rifle up and ready, directed toward the in-port cabin hatch, her entire body trembling, every molecule screaming in pain and exhaustion, and the sideways desire to just let go, though she knew she never really could. This is what Veils do. They fight. But when did her father say that? And was this really what he meant? She couldn't even tell anymore. All she knew was in that moment, they would aim high first. The ground was more defensive. A pair of black-gloved hands reached through the gap she'd just squeezed through. Brighton kicked at the pod's release button, a shoulder, and then, at the leverage, the cabin hatch began to move slowly open. She took a shot despite the awkward angle. Its impact against the hatch was enough to buy another couple seconds. She kicked harder at the release button. Launch requires authorization from command personnel. Launch! For fate's sake, launch! She shouted, her voice hoarse, barely audible. The mechanical hesitation felt like years, though it couldn't have been more than a heartbeat. Vocal pattern and biological signature recognized. Launch initiated. Heat again showered over her as a rifle blast impacted the back wall of the pod. The doors finally pulled closed and sealed before she could get off a reply. In relief, Brighton dropped her rifle and dropped her head back against the ground.
Ooh.
Whoa.
What I
Nice.
really like about that is how she thinks of her dad in that moment.
Yeah.
And that is, back to Lucy's original point about learning a lot about the character in an action sequence. That tells me a lot about her and her relationship with her dad.
I also really like that you use a shift in temperature to tell us like that part has ended and now we're in this part. And just that physical cold is really impacting her body and I think adding even more to the fatigue. And then like this scene also acts as like a nice sequel for us because we've just learned a lot about this character too. If I remember correctly, she's a journalist. Like we're under the impression that she's a journalist. And then she just did all this badass ninja stuff and killed all these dudes and now she's escaping. And so now it's us, like it's our turn to kind of get a moment with the change as well.
And I like that it's what you said, Kate, it's about exhaustion and it's about the character being tired. And I think that's, we talk about the initiation of these action scenes and they start off and they're, badass and they're cool and stuff. But I like that there's an arc to it. And so then when you get to the end and they are physically exhausted, emotionally exhausted, I like that there's, consequences or, there's an outcome to the action. And, that goes to pacing and that goes to, a lot of other things that I think are really important.
It's also perfect timing for her to think about her father in that situation because you tend to think back in that way. I think when you get physically tired and more emotionally tired, like she's wiped out from this and you retreat in your mind sort of to like comforting thoughts. I'm not sure her father's comforting, but it's like, you know what I mean? Like it takes you places.
Dig deep to try and find strength
Yeah,
to push
exactly.
forward.
Yeah.
But she pushes forward, and I think that makes us like her as a character because even though she's exhausted, the way that our characters act under great stress and great exhaustion make us like them, form our relationships to them. And the fact that she chooses to keep going, she knows it's not an option to give up, gets us on her side.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's something important here that, and I don't think we've discussed it before. It's the pattern between scene and sequel. This is something that Jim Butcher talks a lot about, how he sets up how he structures his books. And I think it's nice to see that, because this is a sequel scene. So it there's the scene with all the conflict and the fighting and the whatnot, and then the sequel is kind of the deep breath after it, and it's the moment of, okay, and now what? And now what is, she's exhausted, and so it's really nice to be able to really dig into that, into something that should be really relaxing and and like a processing moment, but she's still really, really activated. I don't know. It's just really nice conflict, good tension.
Yeah. I want to end, actually, if we're wrapping up.
Yes.
There's one amazing opening fight scene, which is so confusing. And yet, there's something about it that is so compelling. And it's Yoon Ha Lee's Nine Fox Gambit, which opens with this epic space battle. You would like it, Chris. Epic space battle with lots of new technology that the reader has no idea what it is, and yet I think it's because we're so grounded in Kel Cheris, who is the main character, the protagonist. We're so grounded in her POV and what she cares about that I'm fine to let it wash over me. I'm just like, okay, I don't understand what's happening, but I understand this character, and she's going to carry me through this scene. And I trusted the author to fill in all the things I didn't understand, and that's masterful, I think.
So that was action, and now we want to hear from you, our listening audience. What aren't we talking about that we should be talking about? What do you want to hear more of? Find us at Genre Hustle on Twitter, at Genre Hustle on Instagram. Come by Chris's house. He's home all the time.
We're always here.
Thanks, everyone. That was pretty good.
Bye.
Thanks, bye.